The Arizona Territory, winter of 1883. The land looked like it had been carved out of bone, pale, wind-scoured, and endless. A sky the color of cold steel pressed low over the plains, spitting snow that melted on contact with the frozen ground. Eli Carter rode slow, his chestnut mare laboring through crusted drifts. The horse's breath came in short, steaming bursts, its hooves crunching in the brittle crust. Eli's hat brim sagged under frost, his coat patched more times than he cared to count. Hunger gnawed at his ribs, but he'd learned to ignore it, same way he ignored the ache in his knees and the sting in his fingers. He'd been riding for 3 days without seeing another soul. That was the way he liked it, or at least the way life had taught him to like it. Then he saw them. Tracks. Not coyote, not deer, and not boot, leather either. Bare feet. The prints cut across the snow in erratic, stumbling lines. The edges were sharp, made recently, and the toes dug in deep as if the one who left them had been running. Eli reined in, eyes narrowing. Out here, barefoot meant 2 things, desperation or death. The wind shifted, bringing a scent faint and strange. Smoke, or just the ghost of it. He couldn't tell. With a quiet curse, he nudged the mare forward. Something told him the trail wouldn't lead to anything good, but it would lead to something. The girl in the snow. The prince led him into a shallow gully where a thin creek, frozen solid, ran between banks of ice. The snow had drifted deep here, muffling the world into silence. That's where he saw her. She lay crumpled against a dead cottonwood, her legs half buried in snow. She was young, maybe 17, wrapped in tattered deerskin that barely covered her knees. Strands of black hair stuck to her cheeks, stiff with frost. Her lips were cracked, her eyes half-lidded. Eli slid from his saddle, boots sinking into the drift. He'd seen Apache women before, though not often. The rail towns didn't welcome them, and the reservations swallowed them whole. But this girl looked like she'd been swallowed by the cold instead. Her gaze flicked up at him. Dark, sharp, full of something between fear and defiance. Eli knelt, pulling a strip of jerky from his coat pocket. His last piece. He held it out, palm open. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with trembling fingers, she took it. She didn't say a word, just tore off a bite, chewing slowly, watching him like she expected a trick. "You got a name?" Eli asked. Her brow furrowed. She didn't understand. Or maybe she just didn't want to. The wind carried a low, distant sound. So faint, he thought he'd imagined it. A single drumbeat, then another. Eli's eyes swept the horizon. Smoke, a thin ribbon, far off, but moving with the wind. He looked back at the girl. If her people were out there, they'd see a white man with one of their own. That never ended well. He should have turned back, left her, but he didn't. Instead, he reached for her arm. "Come on," he said. "You'll freeze out here. Shelter in the canyon." They moved slow, her steps uncertain, his mare carrying most of her weight. The snow thickened, the wind knifing through his coat. By the time the canyon rose around them, the world was a blur of white. Eli knew this place, an old trapper's shack tucked into a bend in the rock. He'd passed it years back, when the roof was half intact. Now it was worse, but it was shelter. They reached it just as the snow squall broke. Eli pushed the door, more of a plank nailed to hinges, and it groaned open. Inside smelled of dust and old hides. The single window had been boarded over, and a collapsed table lay against the wall. He led her in, closing the door against the wind. The girl stood still, hugging her arms tight, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Eli struck a match and lit the small iron stove in the corner. The flame caught, filling the shack with a weak orange glow. "You can sit," he said, gesturing to an overturned crate. She didn't move until he turned away. While the fire caught, Eli busied himself with the horse, rubbing her down and checking her hooves. When he glanced over his shoulder, the girl was beside him, smoothing the mare's mane, murmuring words in Apache. The horse leaned into her touch. That said more than words could. When the fire was steady, Eli dug into his saddlebag, pulling out the last of his beans and a tin cup of flour. It wouldn't be much, but it'd be hot. As the smell filled the shack, something pricked at him. He went to the doorway, crouching to study the snow outside. Tracks. Fresh ones. Boot leather. More than one set. Leading right to the canyon mouth. He shut the door slowly. Whoever they belonged to hadn't come all the way in yet. A night of silence. The stew was thin, but it was food. She ate like someone who'd forgotten the taste of it. Slow at first. Then, with urgency, she tried to hide. Eli didn't say a word. The firelight softened the hollows in her cheeks. She was still shivering, so he passed her his blanket. She took it without looking at him. He sat with his back to the wall, watching the fire dance. Why was he doing this? He didn't know her anything. She could bring him nothing but trouble. Maybe it was because she reminded him of another winter, years ago, when someone had pulled him off a saloon floor after a gunfight gone wrong. He'd been half dead, and a stranger had saved him without asking why. Her eyes flicked to him, and for the first time, she reached into the pouch at her belt. She pulled out a small carved pendant, shaped like a hawk in flight. The wood was worn smooth from years of handling. She held it out to him. He hesitated. "What's this?" She didn't answer, just placed it in his hand and closed his fingers over it. The gift was simple, but it was trust. Outside, the wind had died. That's when he heard it, a sound that wasn't wind. Low, drawn out, howling, not wolves. Human voices. Somewhere out there, in the dark. The sound outside the shack carried into Eli's dreams like a cold wind. He woke with his hand already on the Colt at his side. Morning light leaked through the cracks in the walls, and in that pale light, he caught it. Movement at the canyon mouth. He slipped to the doorway, peering out through a split in the boards. 3 men, 2 in trail-worn coats, their rifles slung loose. The third wore a wide-brimmed black hat pulled low, a long duster trailing behind him. Even from this distance, Eli could see the way the man carried himself. Upright, deliberate. That was no drifter. The name hit him like a gut punch. Caleb Vance, a bounty hunter with a reputation for hating Apaches more than he loved money, though he never turned down either. Eli glanced back at the girl. Ahyoka was awake, watching him, silent as ever. She didn't need words to know. She could feel the danger same as he could. He weighed his options. If he rode out alone, Vance might wave him off. No profit in killing a white man without reason. But with her in tow, she was a prize to men like that. For a heartbeat, Eli considered it. Leaving her here with a chance, slim as it was, that Vance wouldn't find her. But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he began packing the saddlebag. "Get your things," he said quietly. She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but she understood the urgency in his tone. They left the shack just as the first snowflake of the day drifted down, heading east into the hills, away from the men who meant to hunt them. Crossing the frozen river. By midday, the hills gave way to a broad river plain, the water frozen into a patchwork of milky ice and black seams where the current still ran. Eli slowed the mare, studying the surface. "We've got to cross," he muttered, more to himself than to her, "or we'll have company by nightfall." He dismounted, leading the horse onto the ice. Each step sent a low groan through the frozen sheet, a sound that made the hair rise on his neck. Ahyoka followed, light on her feet, eyes scanning the ice ahead. She pointed to a pale stretch where snow had settled thick, gesturing for him to avoid it. Halfway across, it happened. The ice beneath Eli's boots snapped with a sound like a rifle crack. In an instant, he plunged through, the shock of the water stealing his breath. The current dragged at him, yanking him under the jagged edges of the ice. He fought up, slamming his shoulder into the frozen sheet, searching for the hole he'd fallen through. Then, a branch. It dropped into the water beside him. He grabbed it, fingers numb, and felt it jerk upward. Ahyoka braced herself on the ice, pulling with everything she had. With one last heave, he broke free, sprawling on the ice, gasping. The mare snorted beside them, stamping nervously. Eli lay there, coughing water from his lungs, while Ahyoka knelt beside him. She didn't speak, just gave him a look that was half relief, half reprimand, as if to say, "You nearly got yourself killed, fool." Then, to his surprise, she laughed. It was a short, sudden sound, the first true expression he'd seen from her. It made the cold cut a little less deep. They finished the crossing more carefully after that, Ahyoka guiding them along the narrow seams where the ice held firm. Hidden Valley. They reached the far bank and followed a narrow deer trail through the trees until the land opened into a small valley hidden by ridges. Here, the snow lay thin. Low bushes still held shriveled berries, and an old fire pit lay ringed with stones, blackened from years past. It wasn't much, but it was safe from the wind and out of sight. While Eli stripped the saddle from the mare, Ahyoka foraged among the bushes, returning with a handful of berries. They weren't sweet, but they'd keep hunger away for a while. As they ate, she began speaking, halting, her words broken with English learned in fragments. Through gestures and the occasional Apache word, she told him her story. Her family had been driven from their land by settlers the year before. The soldiers had promised rations, but the wagons never came. Winter took her parents first, then her younger brother. She had been walking for days when Eli found her. When her voice broke, she turned away, pretending to busy herself with the berries. Eli stared at the fire pit, the memory in his own chest sharp as broken glass. He told her about the duel, how a drunken argument in a saloon had led to him firing a gun in the dark. The bullet had passed through his opponent and struck the man behind him, his brother. It wasn't the kind of thing you shared with strangers. But in this hollow, it didn't feel like a confession. It felt like truth given in return for truth. First signs of affection. That night, while the fire burned low, Eli noticed her moccasin, the sole nearly worn through. Without saying anything, he pulled the leather bootlace from his own boot and began stitching the tear. She watched him work, eyes flicking from his hands to his face. When he finished, she slipped the moccasin back on, flexing her foot. Then she reached out and laid her hand lightly over his. Just for a moment. No smile, no words, but the warmth of it lingered. The world outside that hollow might have been 1,000 miles away, until the rifle cracked. The sound echoed off the ridges, sharp and sudden. The mare tossed her head, nostrils flaring. Eli froze, every muscle tight. That shot wasn't close, but it was close enough. The men hunting them had found their trail again. The first pale light of dawn crept into the valley, painting the frost with a faint silver glow. Eli had been awake for an hour, his back against a cold boulder, watching the trail below. That's when he saw them. 3 riders eased into the narrow pass. Caleb Vance in the lead, his long duster swaying, rifle laid across the saddle horn. Behind him, the 2 outlaws scanned the rocks like wolves sniffing for a kill. Eli's gut tightened. They'd driven them into a corner. The only way out was through. He motioned for Ahyoka to stay low behind a jagged wall of stone. She didn't move, her eyes fixed on the men below. When the riders entered the choke point, Eli kicked loose a boulder. It tumbled down with a roar, smashing into the lead outlaw's horse. The animal screamed, bucking, sending the rider sprawling. Eli fired once, dropping the second outlaw before the man could aim. Vance wheeled his horse, barking orders. The fallen outlaw scrambled for his rifle, but a blur of movement cut across the pass. Ahyoka, clutching a burning branch from their campfire, hurled it into the man's face. The outlaw screamed, blinded, and Eli's second shot ended it. Now it was just Vance, and he wasn't retreating. The final confrontation. Vance swung down from his horse with the ease of a man who'd been in 100 fights. His eyes were cold, calculating, the kind that measured distance in the width of a coffin. "You've been carrying something that belongs to me, Carter," he called. "That Apache girl's worth a bounty big enough to buy your life twice over." Eli stepped out from behind the rock, Colt in hand. "Ain't yours to take." Vance smiled without warmth. "We'll see." The first shot cracked the air. Stone chips stung Eli's cheek. He fired back, forcing Vance into cover behind a boulder. The echo rolled through the pass like thunder. Then Vance charged. They collided in the snow, Eli's Colt skittering away as Vance's shoulder slammed into his ribs. They went down hard, fists and elbows striking in the close, brutal dance of men who knew what losing meant. A flash, the glint of Vance's revolver. The shot burned into Eli's side, white-hot pain flooding his chest. Gritting his teeth, Eli grabbed a fistful of Vance's coat, yanking him forward. With his free hand, he drove his hunting knife up under the man's ribs. Vance's eyes went wide. The fight bled out of him in a long, rattling breath. He collapsed sideways into the snow, the duster spreading like a shadow beneath him. Eli staggered back, pressing his hand to the wound in his side. Warmth seeped between his fingers, and the world tilted. Ahyoka was there in an instant, catching him before he could fall. She lowered him gently, her hands working quickly to bind the wound with strips torn from her own clothing. She murmured in Apache, her voice low and steady, the words carrying the rhythm of a prayer. Eli didn't know what they meant, but he understood all the same. The goodbye. 2 days passed before Eli could stand without the world swaying. They stayed hidden in a stand of juniper trees, living off what little food Ahyoka could find. On the morning of the 3rd day, she stood by the mare, her eyes fixed on the ridgeline. "You're leavin'," Eli said quietly. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "My people, what is left? I go back." He wanted to tell her to stay, that the trail ahead might be easier together. But he saw the truth in her eyes, the pull of home, even if it was nothing more than ashes. She stepped closer, reaching into the pouch at her belt. From it, she drew the pendant, the carved hawk. She placed it in his hand once more, curling his fingers around it. "Now you," she said softly, touching his chest where his heart beat beneath. Eli swallowed hard. "I'll keep it safe." For a long moment, they stood there, the cold air between them carrying all the words neither could say. Then she turned, walking toward the rising sun. She didn't look back. Eli watched until the curve of the ridge swallowed her. Only then did he slide the pendant onto a cord around his neck, feeling its weight settle against his skin. The ride on. When the sun cleared the peaks, Eli swung into the saddle. The wound in his side still ached, but it was a pain he could carry. The land stretched out before him, wide, empty, and waiting. Somewhere out, there were new trails, new towns, and maybe a place he could stop running from himself. He touched the pendant, feeling the smooth grain under his fingers. It wasn't just wood anymore. It was a reminder of a girl who had walked barefoot through winter and still found the strength to laugh. A reminder that sometimes the people you meet on the trail aren't meant to stay. They're meant to change you. The mare moved into a steady trot, the sound of her hooves fading into the wind. Eli didn't look back. Some folks you meet along the trail stay with you, even when the trail takes you apart.